My grandmother Rose was the sweetest Italian woman you could ever imagine. She made the best Sunday sauce in New Jersey, went to Mass every morning at 7 a.m., wore flower print dresses, tended her garden for 50 years, pinched my cheeks until they hurt, and stuffed money in my pocket when my parents weren't looking, and she'd call me baby at least 47 times in a single phone call. Every Sunday of my entire childhood without fail our entire family gathered at her little house in Bloomfield, the same house she'd lived in since 1965, the same house where my father grew up, the same house with the chipped porch steps, the ceramic gnomes with faded paint, and the smell of garlic and onions that had permanently soaked into the walls, the curtains, the carpets, our clothes, and you could smell Nana's house from the street. When we turned onto her block, my father would roll down the windows and say, "Smell that? That's love, Mikey. That's your grandmother's love, cooking for 6 hours." And Nana would be in the kitchen at 6 a.m. every Sunday stirring a pot of sauce that would simmer until dinner at 4 p.m., using a wooden spoon that must have been 50 years old, worn smooth from decades of stirring, and she would not let anyone else touch it because, "This spoon knows the sauce, you use another spoon, the sauce gets confused." And we all laughed at that, thinking it was just cute old lady talk, having no idea what was really going on. My grandmother was beautiful when she was young. I'd seen the photos, black and white, slightly faded, tucked into old albums that smelled like must and time, and in them she had dark hair piled high, sharp eyes that seemed to look right through the camera, and a smile that suggested she knew something you didn't. She married my grandfather Vito Marchetti in 1964, and I never knew Vito because he died before I was born, car accident. My father always said, "When your dad was just a kid, very sad." Nana never really got over it, and we had one photo of them together on their wedding day, Nana in a beautiful white dress, young and radiant, Vito in a sharp suit, thin mustache, dark eyes, standing tall, looking like they belonged in a movie. And when Nana caught me looking at that photo she'd say, "Handsome, right? He was a good man, a good husband, a good father." Then she'd cross herself and go back to her cooking, and I never asked more questions because why would I? But there was one thing, one detail that I noticed as a child but never thought about as an adult: the basement door at the end of the hallway in Nana's house, past the bathroom and the linen closet, an old wooden door with a brass knob that was always locked, always, and when we were kids my cousins and I would dare each other to try the handle, sneaking down the hallway when Nana was in the kitchen, hearts pounding, and one of us would reach out and twist and it was locked, always locked. And when we'd ask, "What's down there, Nana?" she'd wave her hand like shooing a fly and say, "Nothing, baby, just old junk, very boring, dusty, dirty, you don't want to go down there." Then she'd push a plate of cookies toward us and say, "Manja, eat, you're too skinny," and we'd forget about it because cookies. For 30 years I forgot about that door. Until that Tuesday night, November 14, 2024 at 11:47 p.m. when I was in my apartment in Brooklyn half watching some Netflix documentary and my phone rang with my father's name on the screen. At nearly midnight, Dad never calls after 9 p.m. never, and I knew something was wrong before I even picked up, and when I said, "Hey Dad, what's," he said, "She's gone, Mikey," in a voice that was strange, not crying but something worse, the sound of a man in shock, and I said, "What? Who's gone?" And he said, "Grandma, Nana, she passed tonight in her sleep. Your aunt found her when she went over for morning coffee but she'd been gone for hours. She was just peaceful like she was sleeping. She had her rosary in her hands," and I don't remember what I said or hanging up. I just remember sitting in the dark for a long time staring at nothing. The next few days were a blur. Flights from across the country. Relatives I hadn't seen since I was 10, aunts weeping, uncles standing around with their hands in their pockets, endless platters of cold cuts and Italian bread that nobody really ate. We buried Nana on a gray Friday morning in November, the sky the color of dirty laundry, spitting cold rain that seeped into your bones, the priest saying words I couldn't hear, my father standing beside me rigid as a statue, not crying, just staring at the coffin. And I threw a handful of dirt onto her casket and it made a hollow sound that I still hear in my dreams. Afterward we went back to her house, the tradition: eat cold cuts, drink whiskey, tell stories, cry some more, and that's when my father pulled me aside and reached into his pocket and pulled out a small silver key, old, slightly tarnished, ordinary looking, and said, "This was in her things, Mikey. a key to the basement. She left a note with your name on it saying you should be the one to go through whatever's down there. And I looked at the key in my palm, small ordinary silver, and it felt heavier than any key I'd ever held. I waited until everyone had gone home, until the house was empty and quiet, then I walked down the hallway, past the bathroom, past the linen closet, to the old wooden door with the brass knob, and for a moment I just stood there, 30 years of curiosity, 30 years of wondering, all coming down to this moment, and I slid the key into the lock and it turned with a click that sounded deafening in the silence. And I opened the door and the stairs creaked under my feet, the same creak I remembered from childhood when I'd sneak to the top step and peer down into darkness before. Nana caught me and pulled me back, saying, "Stay out of there, baby. Dangerous, dangerous, not dusty, not boring, dangerous," and the light switch was at the bottom. I felt along the cold concrete wall and finally found it and clicked, and fluorescent lights flickered to life, buzzing softly, revealing what I can only describe as a time capsule from another life, because the basement wasn't full of junk, it was full of evidence. The first thing I saw was the wall, the entire back wall of the basement, covered in newspaper clippings, yellowed with age, carefully arranged, held in place with yellowing tape, dozens of them, hundreds of them, all from the 1970s and early 1980s, the Newark Star-Ledger, the New York Daily News, the New York Post, the Brooklyn Eagle, and every single one was about organized crime. Lucchese capo found dead in Brooklyn, Genovese associate missing, feared dead, Mafia witness dies in CR accident, unsolved murders puzzle police. And then I noticed the circles. In every single article certain words and phrases were circled in red pen, names, dates, locations, and in the margins in handwriting I recognized instantly my grandmother's careful cursive. There were notes: he talked, he paid, Johnny knew too much, FBI getting close, Warren V, done, safe now, and I felt the basement spin around me. There was a filing cabinet in the corner, old metal, olive green, and I pulled open the top drawer and found photographs, hundreds of them, black and white mostly, men in suits outside restaurants, men getting into cars, men sitting in chairs looking terrified, their faces bruised and swollen. And in the background of many of them, partially visible, sometimes just an arm or a shoulder, stood a woman, and I pulled one out, dated 1972, showing a man with a broken nose handcuffed to a pipe in what looked like a warehouse, and there she was, my grandmother, leaning against a wall smoking a cigarette, looking completely bored, professional, like she'd seen this 100 times before. And I pulled out another from 1975, same woman standing next to two men in suits who were shaking hands, and she was smiling, but it wasn't the smile I knew from Sunday dinners, it was something else, something colder. The bottom drawer held letters, dozens of them tied with string, dated from 1965 through the 1980s, and they were love letters, sort of. My dearest Rose, last night was perfect, the problem in Bensonhurst is solved permanently, he won't be talking to anyone ever again, your instructions were exactly right. The boys send their regards, yours always V, and I stared at the signature V for Vito, my grandfather, and another, Rose, Johnny G wants to meet, he has a problem only you can solve, something about a witness who's changed his story, you know what to do, I love you, I count the days until I'm home, V, and another, Rose, the money is in place, the accounts in Switzerland are set up exactly as you instructed, no one will ever trace them, all my love, V. Behind the filing cabinet hidden in the wall I found a small metal lockbox. I had to break the lock with a hammer, and inside was a wedding photograph, my grandmother and Vito, 1964, with on the back in her handwriting, Vito and Rose, the happiest day of my life, also the day my real life began, and a rosary old and worn, and a lock of baby hair labeled, Michael Jr., 1966, my father, and a small notebook leather-bound, her diary, and a manila envelope sealed with my name on it, which I didn't open, not yet. I drove to my father's house that same night and he was still awake, sitting in the dark, a glass of whiskey in front of him like he'd been waiting, and I spread the photographs across his kitchen table, the letters, the diary, the newspaper clippings, and he looked at them for a long time, then sighed deeply and said, I was wondering how long it would take you to find all that, and I said, you knew, and he said, I've always known, Mikey, I grew up with it, my mother, your grandmother, wasn't always a little old lady who bakes cookies, and I said, then who was she? And Dad poured himself another whiskey, then he started talking. In 1963 my grandmother was 22 years old, born Rose Conti in Newark, New Jersey, the daughter of Italian immigrants. She was beautiful and she was smart, scary smart, and she met Vito, the Blade, Marchetti at a diner in Elizabeth when he was 35, handsome, well-dressed and connected, deeply connected as an enforcer for the Lucchese family. His job was to make problems disappear permanently. He courted her for 6 months, told her he was in waste management. She knew he was lying, she knew exactly what he did and she didn't care. They married in 1964 and for 5 years she played the good wife, stayed home, cooked dinner, raised their son, pretended not to notice the blood on his shirts, pretended not to see the stacks of cash in the closet. Then in 1969 everything changed when Vito got arrested, not for murder, they could never prove that, but for tax evasion. 7 years in federal prison, leaving my grandmother alone with a 3-year-old son and no legitimate income. And that's when she did something unexpected. She took over his business, not officially, not in any way that could be traced, but she started making phone calls, visiting old friends of Vito's, offering advice, solving problems, and she was good at it, better than Vito had ever been, so good that within 2 years she'd built a reputation as the Countess, elegant, sophisticated and utterly ruthless, never carrying a weapon, never getting her hands dirty, simply arranging things. A competitor causing problems? She'd have tea with his wife, mention that her husband should consider retirement, and the next week he'd sell his business and move to Florida. A witness planning to testify? She'd send flowers to his mother's funeral with a note that simply said, "Remember," and the witness would suddenly remember he had nothing to say. A federal agent getting too close? She'd show up at his daughter's school play, smile warmly, ask how his family was doing, and the agent would transfer within a month. She was called the Countess because she operated like royalty, untouchable, elegant above the filth and beneath that elegance as cold as ice. I spent the next month digging, hired a private investigator named Frank DeMarco, a retired NYPD detective, and when I showed him the photographs his face went pale and he said, "I've heard of the Countess, she was a ghost story, a legend, we never knew if she was real," and I said, "She was real, she was my grandmother," and Frank helped me file Freedom of Information requests, and finally the FBI file arrived. 847 pages about my grandmother, showing she was suspected in at least 12 murders between 1971 and 1983. 12 men, all connected to organized crime, all killed in ways that looked like accidents or robberies or natural causes, connected to money laundering operations, moving millions through small businesses in New Jersey and Brooklyn, with informants in 3 police departments and at least 1 federal agency, and they could never prove a thing. One agent's notes read, "Subject: Rose Marchetti is perhaps the most frustrating target of my career. She knows we're watching, she smiles at us, she waves, she leaves cookies on our surveillance vans, and she never ever makes a mistake." In 1976 the FBI planted a listening device in her kitchen and for 3 months listened to recipes, complaints about tomato prices, phone calls about homework, gossip about neighbors, plans for church fundraisers. Not once did she mention anything illegal, having no idea that making sauce meant planning a hit, too much salt meant a shipment was compromised, the neighbor's dog won't stop barking meant the police were watching. She'd coded everything and they never figured it out. Frank helped me identify 12 unsolved deaths. In 1971 Salvatore Romano, a Lucchese associate talking to the FBI, died in a car crash with brakes cut and a woman seen near his garage. In 1973 Vincent Gallo, a crew leader moving into Lucchese territory, had a heart attack at 43 with perfect health 6 months earlier, and a woman with flowers visited his office. In 1975 Thomas D'Annunzio, a federal witness in protective custody, hung himself the night before testifying, and a hotel receptionist remembered a well-dressed woman asking for his room number. In 1977 Michael Rossi was shot twice in an alley, and my grandmother was seen at a diner near his neighborhood 2 days before. 8 more, each with a woman in the background that no one noticed. Deep in the lockbox I found one more letter dated 1985. "My dearest Vito, I have done terrible things in your name, things that will follow me to my grave. I have blood on my hands that will never wash clean, but I did it for you, for our son, for the life I thought we would have. I don't regret it, I can't afford to regret it. Regret is a luxury for people who have choices. I stopped having choices the day I married you, but sometimes late at night I wonder who I might have been, a teacher, a nurse, a woman whose hands were clean. I'll never know. Yours always, Rose." I read that letter a dozen times and each time I cried harder. 3 weeks later a man knocked on my door. Retired FBI agent Dennis Callahan, who'd worked her case from 1976 to 1983, and he said, "I spent 7 years trying to put your grandmother in prison. She was the best I ever went up against. She made fools of us for a decade. She knew everything. We'd get a new surveillance van, she'd wave at it. We'd put a new agent on her detail, she'd have his file within a week. But here's the thing. In all those years we never found evidence of her hurting anyone who didn't have it coming. She targeted mobsters, rival crew members, witnesses who'd lied, men who hurt women and children. Not one innocent victim. She killed people, but she might have killed more bad people than the entire justice system did in those years." Then he shook my hand and left, and I never saw him again. I went back to Nana's house one last time before it was sold, and walking through her garden I noticed something strange. A patch of roses, her favorite, the deep red ones, was arranged in the shape of a cross. I knelt down, pushed aside the soil, and found a small metal box containing a rosary, the wedding photo, a lock of my father's baby hair, a photo of me as a child on her lap, and a letter with my name on it that said, "My darling grandson, if you're reading this, you found my secrets. I'm sorry you had to learn this way. I wanted to tell you myself, but I was a coward. I did terrible things and I won't ask for forgiveness, but I need you to believe this. Everything I did for family, for your father, for you, for the life you got to live. The world is full of monsters and I was one of them, but I was a monster who protected the people I loved. That has to count for something. I loved you from the moment I held you. I love you still. I left you money, it's clean now. Use it, live the life I couldn't live. Be happy, be good, be better than me. Your Nana. P.S. The real recipe is in the wooden spoon drawer. Stir with love." The next day a letter arrived from a law firm in Newark saying I was the beneficiary of a trust fund established in 1983 worth $2.4 million from various investments through shell corporations in Delaware, the Caymans, Switzerland. Impossible to trace. The money was clean, she'd made sure of it. I went back to the kitchen and opened the wooden spoon drawer, and there it was on a yellowed index card. Nana Rose's Sunday sauce, San Marzano tomatoes, garlic, onion, basil, parsley, salt, pepper, sugar, olive oil, meat, the secret ingredient. Love. Stir it in with every stir. Think about the people you're cooking for. Cook for at least 6 hours. Taste as you go. Pay attention. Mange bene. Eat well, live well, love well. So here I am, 37 years old, surrounded by evidence that my sweet grandmother was one of the most effective criminals in New Jersey history, and I still don't know who she was. Was she a monster? She killed 12 people. Was she a hero? She killed bad men. Was she a victim? She was 22 when she met Vito, 23 when she married him, 28 when she was left alone. She didn't choose this life. Was she a survivor? She outsmarted the FBI for decades, built an empire, protected her family, died peacefully at 84. Maybe she was all of those things. The woman who made those men disappear was the same woman who held me when I had nightmares, who taught me to make pasta, who cried at my graduation. And how do you hold both of those truths at once? I don't have an answer, but when I make her sauce I feel her with me. I stir in the love. I think about her hands, the same hands that did terrible things, holding my face and telling me she loved me, and somehow that's enough. I believe my grandmother was a good woman who did bad things. I believe she loved her family more than anything. I believe she did what she had to do to protect us. I believe she regretted it, but she couldn't afford to regret. I believe she's at peace now, and I believe I'll see her again someday, and when I do I'll hug her, I'll thank her, and I won't ask about the rest. 6 months later I bought a house in New Jersey with a big garden, and I'm planting roses, her roses. The money sits in the bank untouched mostly. My father and I talk more now about her, about the past. The FBI called again wanting to ask about known associates, and I told them I didn't know anything because I don't know about that, but I know my grandmother and I'm not telling them anything else. I went back one last time before the sale closed, and the new owners, a young couple with kids, seemed nice. I knelt where I found her box and the roses were gone, but I could still feel her, and I whispered, "Thank you, Nana, for everything," and the wind picked up and for a second I smelled garlic and basil and Sunday sauce, then it was gone. So now I'm asking you. What would you do? Tell the world? Keep the secret? Take the money? Give it away? I don't know the right answer, but if you have family secrets of your own, maybe it's time to start asking questions. Just be careful what you find because some doors are locked for a reason, and since you made it this far, here's the real recipe. Heat olive oil in a large pot over medium heat. Cook 1 chopped head garlic and 1 diced onion until soft, about 10 minutes. Don't rush this step. Add 2 canned San Marzano tomatoes crushed with your hands or a spoon. Add salt, pepper and a pinch of sugar. Bring to a boil, then reduce heat to low. Add meat, braciole, Italian sausage, meatballs, whatever your family wants. Simmer for at least 6 hours, stirring every 20 minutes or so, tasting as you go, adjusting seasoning. In the last hour add fresh basil and parsley. Serve over pasta, rigatoni or cavatelli, something that holds sauce. Grate fresh Parmesan on top, not the canned stuff, never the canned stuff. And look at the faces of the people you're feeding, because that's the reward. Mangia bene. Live well, love well.